Picture a world 4.7 million years ago. No fire, no language, no weapons beyond sticks and stones. You stand barely 4 feet tall on legs that still remember the trees, in a body caught between two evolutionary paths, neither fully ape nor fully human. You are Ardipithecus, one of the earliest members of the human family tree, and you are not the apex predator. You are prey. This is the story of Ara, a young female living in the dense forests of East Africa, where the trees were beginning to thin, where the climate was shifting, and where every decision meant the difference between seeing another sunrise or becoming food for creatures designed by evolution to kill. Her clan numbered only 9, a desperate handful clinging to existence, in a world dominated by saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, and crocodiles the size of buses. They couldn't run fast enough to escape predators. They couldn't climb well enough to live permanently in trees. They were trapped in an evolutionary middle ground that should have been a death sentence. But somehow, against mathematics and probability and nature's brutal calculus, they survived. And their survival strategies would echo through 4.7 million years to reach us today. Subscribe now and stay until the end, because this is the story of how we almost didn't make it, and the impossible choices that ensured we did. Ara's hands gripped the fig branch with fingers that were too long for walking, too short for true brachiating. She was stuck between worlds, literally and evolutionarily. The fig tree stood at the edge of the thinning forest, one of the last tall trees before the landscape opened into grasslands that stretched to the horizon like a golden sea of death. She was 18 years old. Though she had no concept of counting years, she only knew seasons, the wet times when fruit was abundant and the dry times when her clan starved. This was the beginning of a dry season that the elders said would be the worst in living memory. The rains had failed. The fruits were withering on branches, and the waterhole, their only reliable source of drinking water, was shrinking daily. Her clan huddled in the branches around her, 9 individuals representing 3 generations of desperate survival. There was Kuna, the matriarch, her face lined with scars from a leopard attack she'd survived in her youth. Holan, the only adult male, his body lean and nervous, constantly scanning for threats. 4 juveniles, including Ara's younger sister Miri, barely 10 years old and already showing signs of malnutrition, and 2 infants clinging to their mothers' backs. Their cries a constant reminder that the clan's resources were stretched impossibly thin. Ardipithecus ramidus, that's what scientists in white coats would one day call them. They stood about 4 feet tall when upright, weighed maybe 60 pounds, had brains only slightly larger than chimpanzees. They could walk on 2 legs for short distances, but it was clumsy, energy-intensive, nothing like the efficient bipedalism that would evolve millions of years later. They still had grasping feet, partially opposable big toes designed for climbing, which made walking even more awkward. They were caught in evolution's most dangerous trap, specialized enough that they couldn't compete with true apes in the trees, but not specialized enough to dominate the ground. They were mediocre at everything, exceptional at nothing. Ara watched the grasslands with eyes that could see both opportunity and death. Out there, massive herds grazed, ancient elephants, 3-toed horses, giant pigs, antelopes of species that would never see the modern world. All that meat, all that protein, all completely inaccessible to a clan that had no weapons, no hunting strategies, no way to bring down prey. The Dinophilis moved with practiced coordination, forming a loose circle around the clan. These weren't impulsive killers. They were strategic hunters who had studied their prey, identified weaknesses, and planned this ambush with an intelligence that rivaled the hominids themselves. Ara's mind processed the situation with a speed that surprised even her. 6 cats, 9 clan members. Open ground. No trees close enough to climb before the cats could strike. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Some of them were going to die in the next 60 seconds. But which ones, and how many, was still negotiable. Olen screamed, a vocalization designed to startle. To buy seconds, the clan immediately shifted formation, the adults moving outward, creating a ring around the juveniles and infants. It was instinctive, programmed by millennia of primate social evolution. Protect the young, sacrifice the old if necessary. The lead Dinophilis, a massive male with scars across his muzzle, made the first move, feinting toward Kuna. The old matriarch didn't flinch. Instead, she did something the cat didn't expect. She grabbed a rock from the ground and threw it. The stone struck the cat's face, not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to confuse. Predators expected prey to run, to freeze, or to submit. They didn't expect projectiles, Ara understood immediately. She grabbed her own rock and threw, her long arms providing leverage that quadrupeds could never match. Miri followed, then the other juveniles, a sudden barrage of stones flying at the circling cats. Most missed. Some bounced harmlessly off thick hides. But the effect was psychological rather than physical. The cats' attack rhythm was disrupted. Their confidence shaken by prey that refused to follow the script. The lead male snarled and rushed forward, deciding to end this quickly. He targeted the weakest link, one of the mothers carrying an infant on her back. The female screamed and ran, her maternal instincts overriding group cohesion. And that was the mistake the cats had been waiting for. Two cats peeled off to chase her, working as a team to separate her from the group, to isolate and kill. But Olin did something revolutionary. He didn't freeze, didn't watch helplessly. He ran after the cats, screaming, waving his arms, making himself as large and threatening as possible. It should have been suicide. A 60-pound hominid challenging 400-pound predators. But Ara saw Olen's strategy and joined him, and so did Kuna. And suddenly 3 adults were charging at the cats, throwing rocks, screaming. Creating chaos where there should have been an easy kill. The cats hesitated. This wasn't normal prey behavior. This was dangerous, unpredictable, potentially costly behavior. One cat had already taken a rock to the eye and was bleeding. The lead male had cuts on his nose. For predators that relied on their faces to hunt, facial injuries were serious problems. The cost-benefit calculation shifted. The lead male made a low growl, a command, and the pack began to withdraw, melting back into the grass. But it wasn't a retreat. It was a tactical pause. The cats didn't leave. They circled at a distance, visible as dark shapes in the golden grass, waiting for the hominids to resume their journey to the waterhole, because the cats knew something the clan was only beginning to realize. Eventually, they would have to drink. Eventually, they would have to let their guard down. And when they did, the ambush would continue. Ara looked at the waterhole, still 100 yards away, then at the circling cats, then at her clan members, all of them terrified, some injured, all of them dying of thirst. The sun was climbing higher, the temperature rising, dehydration becoming as deadly as the predators. Kuna made urgent signals. We go back, we return to the trees, we survive without water for another day. It was the safe choice, the survival choice. But Ara looked at Miri's cracked lips, at the infants whose cries had gone hoarse, at Olen's sunken eyes. They wouldn't survive another day without water. Their bodies were already shutting down. She made a decision that her primitive brain could barely articulate, but her instincts understood perfectly. She picked up the largest rock she could carry and began walking toward the waterhole. Not running, not sneaking. Walking deliberately, openly, challenging the cats with her posture and her pace. The message was clear. We're going to drink, and you'll have to kill us to stop us. Kuna tried to pull her back, but Ara shrugged off the matriarch's hand. Then Olin stepped beside her, his own rock raised, then Miri, then one by one. The entire clan formed a line and walked toward the waterhole together, weapons ready. Terror and determination mixed in equal measure. The cats watched this unprecedented display with tilted heads and switching tails, and for the first time in their evolutionary history, they encountered something that would plague predators for the next 4.7 million years. Prey that refused to act like prey. The waterhole sat in a natural depression, surrounded by muddy banks where countless animals had trampled the earth into slick, treacherous clay. The water level had dropped dramatically. What had been a small pond was now barely more than a puddle, maybe 20 feet across, the edges already turning green with algae and decay. Ara's clan approached in their defensive line formation, every member holding a rock, every eye scanning for movement in the grass. The Dinophilis pack had stopped their obvious circling, which was somehow more terrifying than seeing them. Invisible predators were always more dangerous than visible ones. They reached the water's edge, and the smell hit Ara immediately. Rot, death, something fundamentally wrong. She looked down into the murky water and saw the source. A hippo carcass, partially submerged, bloating in the heat, contaminating the entire waterhole with its decay. The water was poisoned. Not immediately lethal, perhaps, but drinking it would mean sickness, weakness, possibly death from disease rather than predators. Kuna made a sound of despair, a vocalization that carried the weight of understanding that their situation had just become impossible. No water here meant they had to find another source, but the next waterhole was 2 miles away across open savanna. They would never make it, not with cats tracking them, not with the young and weak already dehydrated. Miri, desperate beyond reason, moved toward the water anyway. Her body was screaming for hydration, and her juvenile brain couldn't fully process why they shouldn't drink. Ara grabbed her sister and pulled her back, but Miri fought, her strength surprising, her need overriding her survival instinct. That's when the cats attacked. They had been waiting for exactly this moment. Distraction, division. The clan's attention focused inward rather than outward. The lead male came from the left at full sprint, targeting Kuna, who stood at the edge of the group. 2 more cats charged from the right, aiming for the mothers and infants. Olin saw the attack a fraction of a second before impact and threw himself at the lead male, his rock swinging in a wild arc. The stone connected with the cat's shoulder, and the Dinophilis twisted mid-air. Its trajectory altered just enough that its jaws closed on Olin's arm instead of his throat. The crunch of breaking bone was audible even over the screams. Olin went down the cat on top of him, but he didn't stop fighting. His free hand found the cat's eye and dug in with desperate fury, and the Dinophilis released him, backing away, shaking its head. But the damage was done. Olin's arm hung at an unnatural angle, blood pouring from deep puncture wounds. In this world, such an injury was a death sentence, if not from the wounds themselves, then from infection, or from being unable to defend himself the next time predators came. The 2 other cats had been driven back by a barrage of rocks from the rest of the clan, but they hadn't retreated far. All 6 predators now stood in a loose semicircle, blocking the route back to the forest, and their body language had changed. They had drawn blood. They had injured an adult. The cost-benefit calculation had shifted back in their favor. Ara helped Olin to his feet, her mind racing. They couldn't fight. They couldn't run. They couldn't drink the poisoned water. The sun was climbing toward its zenith, and in a few hours, the temperature would be deadly even without predators or thirst. Then she saw it, upstream from the waterhole. Perhaps 50 feet away, water was seeping from the ground, creating a small spring where it emerged from underground. The water there would be clean, uncontaminated by the dead hippo. But reaching it meant leaving the relative safety of the group, crossing open ground, and hoping the cats didn't use the opportunity to attack. Kuna saw where Ara was looking and made urgent negative gestures. Too dangerous, too risky. We stay together. But Ara was already moving, grabbing 2 of the sharpest rocks from the ground, making a decision that would either save them all or get her killed in the next 30 seconds. She ran, not toward the spring, but toward the nearest Dinophilis, screaming, waving her arms, throwing 1 rock with all her strength. It struck the cat's face, and the predator recoiled in surprise. Ara used that moment to change direction, sprinting toward the spring, gambling that the cats would be confused long enough for her to reach it. She was wrong. 2 cats peeled off from the group and gave chase, their powerful legs eating up the distance, their breath already hot on her back. Ara's awkward bipedal gait was no match for their quadrupedal sprint. She would never reach the spring before they reached her, but that wasn't her plan. 10 feet from the spring, Ara suddenly stopped and spun around, her remaining rock raised, placing herself between the charging cats and the water source. And she did something that would echo through millions of years of human evolution. She stood her ground and screamed defiance, challenging the cats to take her if they wanted the water, making herself a barrier, a guardian, a protector of resources. The cat skidded to a stop, confused by prey that should be running, but instead was fighting. And in that moment of hesitation, the rest of the clan understood Ara's strategy and rushed forward, forming a defensive line around the spring, creating a living wall between predators and survival. The standoff was complete. Cats on one side, hominids on the other, and between them clean water. The difference between life and death. The lead male Dinophilis made his decision and charged directly at Ara. 400 pounds of muscle and fang, close enough that she could see the scars on his muzzle, close enough to smell the blood on his breath, and this time there was nowhere to run. Ara didn't think. There was no time for thought, no room for the complex calculations her small brain might have been capable of. There was only instinct channeled through desperate innovation. She threw herself to the side at the last possible second, and the Dinophilis's momentum carried it past her, directly into the shallow spring water. The cat's paws hit the slick mud at the water's edge, and physics betrayed it. 400 pounds of predator couldn't find traction on the wet clay. The cat scrambled, its claws finding no purchase, its body sliding sideways into the spring with an undignified splash. Ara didn't hesitate. While the cat was off balance, disoriented, she grabbed a rock twice the size of her fist and brought it down on the animal's head with every ounce of strength her small body could generate. The impact made a sound like a branch breaking. The cat yowled and twisted away, blood streaming from a gash above its eye. Its earlier confidence shattered by pain and the unprecedented reality of prey inflicting serious injury. But Ara had made a critical mistake. She had moved away from her clan, isolated herself in her attack, and now the other 5 cats were circling her specifically. Recognizing her as both threat and opportunity, Kuna screamed a warning, but it was Olen who acted. Despite his shattered arm, despite the blood loss that was making his vision swim, he lurched forward and did something that 4 million years of primate evolution had prepared him for, but that Ardipithecus had rarely attempted. He threw a rock with his good arm, not at the nearest cat, but at a dead tree branch lying near the spring, a large, straight piece of wood, weathered but solid. The rock struck the branch with enough force to roll it toward Ara, and she understood immediately. She grabbed the branch, 5 feet long, thick as her arm, heavy, and swung it in a wide arc. It wasn't a sophisticated weapon. She had no technique, no training, no concept of what she was doing beyond desperate flailing. But the branch had reach, and reach meant she could strike predators before they struck her. The nearest Dinophilis lunged, and Ara's branch caught it across the nose with a crack that echoed across the savannah. The cat screamed and backed away, and suddenly Ara wasn't just prey with a stick. She was something new, something evolution hadn't prepared predators to handle. She was prey with extended reach. Prey that could strike from distance. Prey that had fundamentally changed the rules of engagement. The other clan members saw what Ara had done and immediately began searching for their own branches. Miri found one, then Kuna, then the other adults. Within seconds, 5 hominids stood in a defensive semicircle around the spring, each holding a wooden club, each capable of delivering crushing blows before claws or teeth could reach them. The Dinophilis pack leader, bleeding from his head, his earlier confidence replaced by wariness, made a low rumbling sound. The other cats responded by backing away slowly, their eyes never leaving the branch-wielding hominids, their body language communicating confusion and recalculation. The cats had hunted countless species over their evolutionary history. They knew how to kill everything that walked, crawled, or flew in this ecosystem. But they had never encountered prey that modified their environment, that used tools not just for gathering food, but for defense. That extended their physical capabilities beyond what their bodies alone could do. This was new. This was dangerous. This might not be worth the cost, but the lead male wasn't ready to give up. He had tasted Olen's blood, had committed to this hunt, and his pride demanded a kill. He began to circle, looking for weakness, waiting for the hominids to drop their guard, to make a mistake. The standoff continued as the sun climbed higher, as the temperature soared, as both predators and prey began to suffer from heat and thirst. Ara's arms ached from holding the branch. Olen swayed on his feet, his injured arm dripping blood into the mud. The infants cried weakly, their voices hoarse from dehydration. Finally, Kuna made a decision. She dropped to her knees at the water's edge, keeping her branch ready in one hand, and drank with the other. It was a calculated risk. She was vulnerable while drinking, but they would all die if they didn't hydrate soon. The lead Dinophilis saw the opening and charged, but this time, he wasn't charging one isolated individual. He was charging a coordinated defensive line of branch-wielding hominids who had learned, in the space of minutes, to work together with weapons. 4 branches swung simultaneously. One caught the cat's front leg, another struck his ribs, a third connected with his head. Hand Aras, swung with all the fury of someone protecting her dying clan, caught him directly across the face with enough force to break teeth. The Dinophilis went down, stunned, blood pouring from his mouth and nose. He wasn't dead, but he was hurt badly enough that his predator calculations had fundamentally shifted. This prey could maim. This prey could kill. This prey was no longer worth hunting. He made a chuffing sound, a retreat call, and the pack began to melt away into the grass. Not running, but withdrawing with the dignity of predators who had decided to find easier meals elsewhere. Ara stood panting, her branch still raised, watching until the last cat disappeared. Then her legs gave out, and she collapsed into the shallow water, drinking desperately. Her body's need for hydration overwhelming everything else. The clan joined her, all of them drinking deeply, splashing water on their faces, letting the life-giving liquid restore what the sun and fear had stolen. Olin drank with his good arm, his broken one cradled against his chest, his face pale but determined. They had survived. Against mathematics, against evolution, against predators designed specifically to kill creatures like them, they had survived. But as Ara sat in the spring, her branch still clutched in her hand, she looked at Olen's injury and knew the hardest challenge was still ahead. Injured members were usually abandoned in their world, left behind to die while the group moved on. It was practical, efficient, the way natural selection worked. But something in Ara rebelled against that mathematics. Olin had saved her, had given her the idea for the branch, had fought despite his injury, and she was not going to let him die alone. By the time they made it back to the forest edge, Olin was barely conscious. His broken arm had swollen to twice its normal size, the flesh hot and discolored. Infection was setting in, inevitable in a world without antibiotics, where a simple wound could become a death sentence within days. Kuna made the gesture that everyone expected, the one that evolutionary logic demanded. We leave him. We move on. We survive without the burden of the dying. It wasn't cruelty, it was mathematics. Olin couldn't climb, couldn't gather food, couldn't defend himself or the group. He was consuming resources without contributing, and in a clan of 9 where starvation was always one bad week away, every mouth mattered. The other adults nodded in grim agreement. Even Olin seemed to understand, his feverish eyes accepting the sentence with the resignation of someone who knew the rules. He made a weak gesture. Go, leave me, I understand. But Ara didn't move. She stood beside Olin, her branch still in her hand, her body language communicating absolute refusal. Miri joined her, then one of the younger mothers, then, surprisingly, Kuna's own juvenile son, barely 12 years old. A divide had formed in the clan, and it represented something unprecedented in their evolutionary history, a choice between efficient survival and costly compassion. Kuna vocalized sharply, anger, frustration, incomprehension. Ara was threatening the entire group's survival for one individual who was already dead. The mathematics were simple. Olin dies either way, but if they stayed to care for him, they would all starve together while wasting time and energy on the inevitable. Ara made gestures back, complex combinations of signs that their limited communication system could barely handle, trying to express concepts that had no words yet. Olin saved me. Olin taught us the branch. Olin is why we survived the cats. We are alive because of him. The argument was emotional, not logical, and emotion was a luxury their species couldn't afford. But Ara refused to move, and neither did the 4 others who had sided with her. The clan was splitting, and splits were death sentences. 9 individuals could barely survive, but 5 versus 4 meant both groups would likely perish. Kuna's face showed an emotion that might have been the earliest form of what would one day be called moral anguish. She looked at Olin, at Ara's determined stance, at the juveniles who had chosen compassion over survival. Then she made a sound, low, uncertain, and sat down. It wasn't agreement. It was surrender to the reality that forcing the issue would destroy the clan more surely than caring for Olin would. They carried Olin into the trees, placing him on a wide branch where he could rest. Ara used her newfound tool-using skills to strip bark from a tree, creating rough bandages for his arm. Another clan member brought him water in cupped hands. They shared their meager food supply with him, each member giving a portion they couldn't spare. It should have been the beginning of the end. Resources wasted, energy diverted, a doomed individual dragging everyone down with him. But something unexpected happened over the next 3 days. Olen didn't die. His fever broke on the second night. His arm, though permanently damaged, began to heal in a gnarled wrong shape that would never function properly but wouldn't kill him. And during those 3 days, while the adults took turns watching over him, Olen did something that justified Ara's impossible gamble. He taught, unable to gather food or defend the territory. Olen used his time to show the juveniles how to make better branches into clubs, how to identify which rocks were best for throwing, how to aim, how to coordinate attacks. He became the clan's first teacher, an individual whose value wasn't in his physical contribution, but in his ability to transfer knowledge. By the 4th day, every member of the clan could wield a branch as effectively as Ara had during the cat attack. They had become, in less than a week, a species that used tools for defense as naturally as they used their hands for climbing, but their newfound abilities were about to face the ultimate test. On the 5th day, smoke appeared on the horizon. Not the small wisps from lightning strikes, but massive columns that turned the sky black. A wildfire, driven by the dry season winds, was sweeping toward their forest with terrifying speed, and between the fire and the only escape route lay an open grassland patrolled by a pack of predators that made the Dinophilis look like housecats hyenodon, ancient wolf-like predators, 15 of them, each weighing 200 pounds, working with an intelligence and coordination that rivaled any predator in history. The clan had survived cats, survived drought, survived impossible odds. But fire and wolves together represented a combination that their newfound tool use couldn't overcome, unless they tried something no Ardipithecus had ever attempted, not just defending with tools, but hunting with them. The impossible idea formed in Ara's mind as she watched the smoke approach and the wolf pack circle below. To survive, they would have to become what had been hunting them. They would have to become predators. The smoke grew thicker, turning the afternoon sun blood red, as the wildfire consumed the forest behind them with a roar that sounded like the earth itself dying. Ara's clan huddled at the forest edge, trapped between the advancing flames and the open grassland where 15 hyenodon waited with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere else to go. The wolf-like creatures were massive, each one larger than any clan member, with bone-crushing jaws and the coordination of a military unit. They had learned that wildfires created opportunities, driving panicked animals into the open where they could be easily picked off. They were waiting for exactly this scenario, terrified hominids fleeing the flames, too desperate to defend themselves. Kuna vocalized urgently, "We run, we scatter, we hope some survive." It was the only strategy they had. Sacrifice the slow so the fast might live. The mathematics of triage, brutal but necessary, but Olen, still weak from his injury but mentally sharp, made a different sound. He pointed at the advancing fire line, then at the dead, dry branches scattered around them, then made striking motions with his good arm. Ara understood immediately, and the idea was so revolutionary, so dangerous, so completely insane that it took her breath away. Fire was death. Fire was nature's ultimate destroyer, the thing every living creature fled from instinctively. But fire was also a tool, the ultimate tool, one that predators feared even more than prey did. She grabbed a long branch, one of the clubs they'd made for defense, and ran toward the fire line. The heat was unbearable, the smoke choking, every survival instinct screaming at her to turn back. But she pushed forward until the branch's tip caught fire, bursting into flames that made her hands blister even through the wood. She turned and ran back to the clan, holding the burning branch like a torch, like a weapon, like humanity's first real advantage over the creatures that had hunted them since the beginning of time, the hyenodon. Pack saw her coming, a tiny hominid, running toward them with fire, and their reaction was immediate and primal. They scattered, yelping, their coordinated formation breaking apart as ancient instinct overrode hunting strategy. Miri understood and grabbed her own branch, running to the fire line, ignoring Kuna's desperate calls to stop. Then the young mother did the same, then Kuna's juvenile son, until 5 clan members stood holding burning branches, forming a line of fire between themselves and the predators. The wolves backed away, confused and frightened, their advantage completely negated by the flames. For the first time in their lives, Ara's clan held weapons that truly worked, that made predators flee, that inverted the entire power dynamic of their existence. But Olin was making urgent gestures, pointing at the main fire that was still advancing, that would consume them all if they didn't move soon. They had perhaps 5 minutes before the flames reached their position. Ara looked at the retreating wolves, then at the open grassland beyond them, then at her burning branch, and made a connection that would echo through 4.7 million years of human evolution. The wolves were fleeing the fire, but they were also fleeing toward the grassland, toward the herds of ancient horses and antelopes grazing in the distance. If the clan followed with their torches, they could drive the wolves directly into the herds, creating chaos, stampedes, opportunities to scavenge, or more. She vocalized, short, urgent, directing, and began running not away from the fire but parallel to it, using the flames as a moving wall that drove everything before it. The clan followed, their burning branches held high, and the Hyenodon pack had no choice but to run ahead of them, barking in confusion and fear. They reached the grassland and the scene became chaos incarnate. The fire, the smoke, the fleeing wolves, and the panicked herds all converged into a stampede of biblical proportions. Hundreds of animals running in all directions, their predator-prey relationships forgotten in the face of the ultimate threat. A young horse, three-toed, the size of a large dog, separated from its herd in the confusion, disoriented by smoke, terrified by the flames. It stumbled, caught its leg in a burrow, and went down hard just 20 feet from where Ara stood. The horse struggled to rise, its leg clearly broken, its eyes wide with panic. In any other circumstance, it would have been claimed by wolves or cats within seconds. But the predators were fleeing the fire, and the horse was alone, vulnerable. Ara looked at her clan members, all of them holding weapons, all of them standing together, all of them staring at the injured horse with an expression that was part hunger, part fear, part something entirely new. Understanding they didn't have to scavenge. They didn't have to steal kills. They didn't have to wait for predators to do the hard work. They could make their own kills. Olin moved first despite his injury, his club raised, approaching the horse with the caution of someone who had never done this before, but understood the concept. The horse tried to flee, but its broken leg betrayed it. Olin's club came down, striking the animal's head, and the horse staggered. Then Ara joined him, and Miri and Kuna, and all 9 members of the clan, their clubs rising and falling, their unified effort overwhelming the horse's desperate struggle. It took longer than it should have. They had no technique, no understanding of where to strike for quick kills, no experience with any of this. But eventually, the horse stopped moving. The clan stood around their first true kill, not scavenged, not stolen, but hunted and killed by their own efforts, and Ara felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't just pride or relief or the promise of food, it was power, agency, the understanding that they were no longer at the mercy of a world that wanted them dead. They had become something new, something that would inherit the earth. Behind them, the wildfire burned itself out at the grassland's edge, having consumed the forest but unable to cross the open ground. The smoke began to clear, revealing a transformed landscape, ash and char where trees had stood, but also countless animals killed by the flames, more meat than the clan could eat in months. They had survived. More than survived. They had adapted, innovated, transformed themselves in the space of a week from prey to predators. Ara looked at Olin, his injured arm cradled against his chest, but his eyes bright with the knowledge that he had helped create something revolutionary. She looked at Miri, her younger sister, who had been willing to stand beside her when efficiency demanded abandonment. She looked at Kuna, whose surrender to compassion had kept the clan together when logic said to let it split. They were still Ardipithecus ramidus, still small, still weak, still caught in evolutionary transition, but they were also the first to use fire as a weapon, the first to hunt cooperatively with tools, the first to choose compassion over efficiency and survive because of it. As the sun set on their transformed world, painting the ash-covered landscape in shades of orange and purple, Gara carved the first piece of meat from their kill and shared it, not keeping the best for herself, but distributing equally, the way they had shared with Olin when efficiency said to abandon him. It was inefficient. It was illogical by pure survival mathematics. But it was human. This is how we survived 4.7 million years ago, not through fangs or speed or individual strength, but through innovation, cooperation, and the revolutionary idea that tools could make us more than our bodies were. Jara's clan discovered that fire wasn't just destruction, that tools weren't just for gathering, and that caring for the injured wasn't weakness but strength. Every human alive today carries the DNA of people who made Ara's choice to stand together, to care for the fallen, to adapt faster than evolution alone would allow. We survived because we refused to accept the role nature assigned us. We survived because we changed the rules. What would you have done in Ara's place? Would you have abandoned Olin to save resources? Would you have had the courage to grab fire when every instinct screamed to flee? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if this journey to humanity's earliest days moved you, subscribe for more stories that reveal who we really are. Because understanding how we survived helps us understand how to keep surviving. Until next time, remember, we are the descendants of the impossible,